is Olivia Nunes, and I am the manager of the Child Care Policy and Funding Unit for the Region Appeal. I'm very happy to welcome you to today's session. We're going to talk a little bit more about the rolling top-up and how we're implementing it. We do know that this is, as we're in June, and it's a kind of a busy time, a transition time for many of you. We're going to, and you guys have a lot to go, or a lot on the go. Then I really appreciate you taking your time to talk and meet with us today. So we are going to jump right in. We'll just cover a few housekeeping and regular items, and then we'll jump right into the presentation. So like always, this presentation is being recorded. By staying in the call, you're kind of consenting to be recorded. Your microphone's going to be muted unless you want to unmute yourself, which we greatly appreciate during that question period. There will be a question and answer period at the end of the teleconference. We'll address questions in the order that we receive them as usual. And if you leave this call and you still have some questions that you couldn't ask during this teleconference, no worries. Your early year specialists are there to ask, to address any questions you might have. Because sometimes you kind of have to walk away from something and think about it, and then you'll be like, okay, well, what about this and whatever. So your early year specialist will be there to help you kind of navigate the next steps as we are moving towards implementation of the rolling top-up. So we hope you do have some questions for us. And if you do, we're going to show you how to, on the next slide, how to ask those questions. There's a couple different ways. First way is at the top of the band of the Teams meeting. You'll see there's a Q&A icon. You just click that icon, and then it will open up that other side panel that you see on the screen, and then you just type in your question there. If there is a question that somebody else has asked and you're like, oh yes, that is a good question, you can upvote that question or thumbs up it, and that way we know, okay, so this one's a popular question, or a lot of agencies have this question. The alternate option is right beside a few rows down. You can click on, see like the raise your hand function, and just raise your hand, and then we can have an open discussion towards the end of today. So those are your two options for asking questions. In terms of our agenda for today, so you may recall in May, we talked to you about the high level, okay, what is the rolling top up? How is it calculated? Why is it important for you? What does it mean for future funding? So we did talk about that in May. Today, we're going to be focusing more on our details related to, okay, how is this going to be implemented for Peel? And just to remind the LHCC agencies on the call, so this call is focused on LHCC agencies that have their head offices in Peel. Because it's where you have your head office located, and with that municipality, they are the ones who are responsible for implementing the rolling top-up for your agency. So if you're on the call, but your head office is outside of Peel, you may also want to contact your overseeing service system manager, because they might be doing it slightly different in terms of timing or how they're implementing it. At the end of the day, the result will more or less be the same, but the steps to get there might look a little different from municipality to municipality. So today we're going to talk about what that plan is, how we're going to be keeping you updated throughout the implementation that it is going to occur over a series of months. We'll talk a little bit about our appeals process, our appeals policy, and then some next steps. And then, like I said, at the end of the call, we'll have questions and answers session so that you guys can ask any questions that you have. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Adrian, and she's going to take us through the next couple slides.
Thanks, Olivia. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrian Holtby, and I'm an advisor in the Early Years and Child Care Services Division, Policy and Funding Unit. I hope you're in a good mood today, not only because of the beautiful sunshine, but because we're gathered here today to talk about rolling top-up. I'm happy to take you through the next few slides to give you a refresher on what the rolling top-up is and to revisit some of the information we brought to you in May. Okay, so let's refamiliarize ourselves with rolling top-up. This slide provides the steps for how the rolling top-up is calculated. So step one, we will confirm your 2025 actual eligible program costs through the reconciliation process. We will then, in step two, compare your 2025 costs to your 2025 benchmark funding. In step three, if actual costs are higher, we will convert that gap to a percentage, and this becomes your rolling top-up ratio. Finally, in step four, when we take that ratio and apply the percentage to the 2026 benchmark, that new calculated amount becomes your rolling top-up allocation. So pretty straightforward in that sense. This slide here is a visual overview of how funding is structured in 2026. Currently, funding is made up of 2026 provincial benchmark funding, rolling over your 2025 top-up funding, legacy or growth. It also consists of 2026 growth for new spaces or sites open in 2026, and then amount in lieu of profit or surplus. So the main takeaway here is that rolling top-up in 2026 replaces both the legacy and growth top-ups from 2025. So instead of getting two separate top-ups, you will now see one rolling top-up that's built into your funding. Everything else remains pretty much the same. It's important to note that the amount in lieu of profit or surplus will be recalculated based on your revised program cost allocation. Okay, so now for new and important information, how are we going to implement the rolling top-up? Over the past few months, we met with a few agencies to gather input to understand the system preferences and explored how different implementation paths could affect your operations. So it was very important for us to engage agencies prior to deciding on how to implement rolling top-up. So I just want to take the time to say a big thank you to those that were able to provide input. So at the end of the day, what we heard was that there was a strong preference for getting the rolling top-up allocation as early as possible, even if that meant that the initial figures were provisional and that the final update would happen a bit later. All in all, LHCC agencies were comfortable with getting two funding updates. What we also heard was that significant changes late in the year make it difficult for you to budget and to spend effectively. So we took all these takeaways into consideration, and our rollout plan for LHCC agencies reflects what we heard from you. So based on the data and the feedback we received, we developed two implementation pathways. The first one is the provisional pathway. So this is the road that most LHCC agencies will be on, which means that you will receive two funding adjustments. The first rolling top-up adjustment, also known as the provisional adjustment, is based on self-reported data that you submitted via your fare. The second adjustment will be your final rolling top-up adjustment, and it will be based on approved final reconciliation data. Pathway number two is for agencies who submitted their financial reporting after the deadline. These agencies will receive one final adjustment that will occur mid to late fall once we have approved their 2025 reconciliation data and we have completed all the reconciliations that were submitted in advance. So now I'm going to turn the mic over to Olivia, who will now take us through the next slides to give you more details about these two pathways.
Thanks, Adrian. So like Adrian mentioned, so the provisional pathway, most of the providers on this call are on this pathway, just based again on the specific feedback that you provided, that it's a lot more challenging, whether your funding is increasing or decreasing, to kind of plan and allocate your budgets with not a lot of time left in the fiscal year. So most of you are going to get on this provisional pathway, will get two adjustments. So you're going to see a provisional adjustment in August based on whatever you reported as part of your reconciliation, your audited financial statement, fair submission, right? And so that this first adjustment is, what the name kind of suggests, provisional or draft or, subject to change, right? Like that's kind of in the term itself, because it's based on whatever you submitted and what we anticipate will happen based on that. In the meantime, internally, we're reviewing your reconciliation or submission, and then we will be reaching out to finalize that for you. If there are any differences or changes between what was submitted originally and what is ultimately becomes your final, then that will, if there are any changes, then we'll have to make those changes late in the year. That will most likely take place late summer, early fall, and that'll be based on your approved program cost. So that's your reconciliation review is complete between yourself and the region appeal, and that'll confirm your final amount, your final ratio amount. Everything will be confirmed with that second adjustment. Now, that being said, if there are no change, then there will be no second adjustment. Then your provisional just becomes the final. So it really depends on, as we are reviewing reconciliation submissions, if there will be any changes to what was submitted or not. But that at least gives you a bit more time in the calendar year to really adjust with what will or could be your kind of steady state 2026 funding amount. So then unfortunately, there are a couple of providers who are on the next pathway, and that's the incomplete pathway. So there's a few people that we're still waiting for their submission for one reason or the other. We don't have the data that we would need in order to issue a provisional pathway. So in those scenarios, if you will get one rolling top-up adjustment. So once you submit and complete, your submission will be reviewed, but we are looking at the folks who submitted on time first, right? Any providers who are a little bit later, they are going to be viewed a little bit later in the process. But based on what you submit at that time, you can, I also anticipate, if you've spent most or all of your 2025 funding, you could potentially anticipate an increase once we eventually make the rolling top-up adjustment. If you spent less than your 2025 CWOC funding amount, then I would plan for a decrease based on the amount of funding that you are returning from 2025. So again, in terms of process, so this will be done, again, it's contingent obviously on when you submit, but this would be done so you're not late summer. This is more mid-fall, right? And then after we've reviewed all the sort of on-time submissions. But again, your final will be based on the same thing, whatever your approved actual program costs are, and it will be your final ratio, your final funding amount. So your final funding amount for 2026 and your ratio amount for 2026 and also going forward as well. So with that, and I do want to talk a little bit about, okay, so how is the region going to be prioritization these reconciliation reviews? As you can imagine, we've got all of the agencies that we oversee as an overseeing SSM for the region appeal, plus all of our center-based. So we will be prioritizing the reviews of the reconciliations based on 3 criteria, right? So if you received high funding amounts, like your allocation for CWOC is quite high. If your allocation, number 2 is if you do have if you received a lot of legacy or growth top up last year, it means that you have more of a probability of being impacted by the rolling top up. So that's the other group of agencies that we're looking at first. The other kind of criteria for we are going to be prioritizing is if you serve both CWOC and school-age children, because then in that situation we're looking at proration, and that adds a little bit more of a level of complexity with the reconciliation. So that's why we selected these 3 criteria. So if you say yes, yes, no, that means maybe you're in the middle, right? If you say yes to all 3, you might be at the higher end. If you say no to all 3, you might be kind of later in the process, because that's kind of how we're triaging all the requests. So going to in terms of timing, right? So right now we're looking at, like we said in the previous slide, August is really going to be your provisional. So August means August payment. So you will see an adjustment to your allocations and gov grants. You're going to start to see the adjusted payments starting on the August 1st payment. In terms of your final, again, we're going to be working through them as quickly as we can. And that would be late summer, early fall, and that will be based on the approved final reconciliation data. And for the folks who have yet to submit, those other rows will need to be completed, and then we will get to your item, and that you're probably looking at mid-fall, right? So then that will also be based on approved reconciliation data. So over to you, Adrian, just to talk about how we're going to keep folks updated.
Thank you. So we know how important it is for you to have clear and correct information to work with. The next few slides will go over our plan to make sure that you have the information and supports you need as a rolling top-up is implemented. In mid-July, we're planning on sending out a memo that shares our rolling top-up implementation approach. At the end of July, about 1 week before the first provisional adjustment, you'll be able to view your updated GovGrants award with your provisional rolling top-up amount loaded into the system. When you receive your provisional rolling top-up update, your award and GovGrants will look slightly different. Your legacy and 2025 growth top-up budget categories will be zeroed out, and then your provisional rolling top-up amount will be in a new rolling top-up budget category. As a reminder, your provisional rolling top-up amount is temporary. It is based on your self-reported 2025 CWEL costs, meaning that the expenses have yet to be reviewed by Peel Region. So after your 2025 reconciliation is reviewed and approved, you will receive a final rolling top-up funding update at that point. If your cost information stays the same after we review your reconciliation, your top-up will likely stay the same. And if we make changes to your CWEL cost based on our review, your top-up allocation will likely change as well. I know it's repetitive, but we're just drilling the principle of provisional versus final. Okay, and in terms of additional support, so we recognize that rolling top-up is new and that it will change or tweak the way you budget and plan. So to support you through the implementation of rolling top-up, your early years specialists will check in with you after you receive your July memo to go through any questions that you may have at that point. As I mentioned earlier, you will receive a second memo that will confirm your final rolling top-up amount. And through our consultation and engagement with LHCC agencies, we heard that you would like to view your memos in GovGrants or store them there so that they're easily accessible and you can reference them. So we are planning to upload your final memo and attach it to your 2026 CWELC award. Okay, let's move on to talk about appeals. Can you appeal? Yes, you can appeal. However, we will be assessing appeals on a case-by-case basis based on the information provided. So appeals will be reviewed in a fair, consistent, and transparent manner in accordance with CWELC and rolling top-up policies. You can appeal a rolling top-up decision if there's a calculation error, there is a program data error, or there is new or corrected financial information. It's important to note that appeals will not be considered where they are based on disagreement with the intent of provincial or Peel Region policy, dissatisfaction with the rolling top-up funding outcome, comparison of funding received by other agencies, costs that were previously reviewed and deemed ineligible without new supporting evidence. They will not be considered when there's poor planning or spending decisions where reasonable opportunity to adjust your budget existed. And finally, appeals will not be considered when forecasts, assumptions, or hypothetical expenditures without verifiable documentation is available. I would like to re-emphasize that if you do appeal, you must support your request by explaining your appeal in detail and providing valid supporting documentation. Okay, how to appeal. We will actually share more detailed information about the appeals process late in July, but what is important for you to know now is that in order to appeal, you must have a valid reason and provide all the relevant documents that support your appeal. It's really, really important to provide clear and sufficient documentation to explain your appeal. And what to expect after you submit your appeal. So once we receive your appeal, we will acknowledge receipt of the appeal submission within 2 business days to give you a peace of mind that your appeal has been received. We will then review your appeal in a fair, consistent, and transparent manner. As I mentioned, we will look at each situation individually based on the information that that has been sent to the region and that you have provided. And then finally, when we make our decision, it will always be in line with provincial and Peel Region CWALC policies. So with regards to funding after the appeal, approved appeal funding adjustments will be added to the next scheduled payment pending the timing and payment cutoff dates on our end. Okay, so I'll turn it back to Olivia now, who'll go over the next steps.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so all right, so what's going to come next? So by mid-July, you're going to get a memo that kind of shares our overall approach, your provisional rolling top-up updated amount, kind of like what's changed, like a little bit of, okay, you were here, now you're here. After you receive that memo, your EYS is going to kind of check in with you to see, what questions you may have. We are also going to be releasing in July an updated CWALC guideline. That'll cover a few a few updates, including rolling top up in the appeals process. And then as we kind of get going through the reconciliations in late summer to fall, that's when you'll receive your final memo, right, related to your rolling top up ratio and that amount that you would be adjusted to. And then you'll see also some changes in gov grants, right? So those are kind of the things that you're going to expect. We're going to make sure that people know exactly where they are in the process and do our best to kind of manage expectations related to timing over the coming months. What you can do in the meantime is, again, because the rolling top-up calculations heavily, oh, sorry, do you mind changing the slide, Alicia? My apologies. Sorry. They rely on your final reconciliation, right? So if we ask, if you to try as much as you can be to answer the questions and provide any additional information related to your reconciliation submissions as soon as you can. If you haven't yet submitted, if you can submit as soon as possible your audited financial statements and your FAIR, and saying this as the unintended consequence of like sort of delayed submissions is that you'll have less time to manage the change at the end of the year. And based on the feedback we heard from you when we engaged you earlier this year, that was a major concern. So any way that you can, if you have not yet submitted, if you can, it would be important to your organization. And in order to help with your funding stability going forward into 2027, again, that's why it's important to budget and plan your allocation on eligible expenses for 2026. Because that will then continue to be like, looking at your expenses against your allocation in this model is something that the model looks for annually, right? It's an annual review of like, what were you provided? What did you spend and how close you've come to that in terms of eligible, expenses, childcare expenses. So now I think I'm going to pass it along to Sonia.
Thanks, Olivia. Good afternoon, everyone. So I don't see any questions, but let me just... So we're here for questions, our question and answer period together. It doesn't look like there's anything so far. I'll just give it a couple of minutes just to see. You can also raise your hand and come off mute if you have any questions. Here we are. Okay, Victor, go ahead.
You're on mute, Victor. You might have to unmute your...
My apologies.
That is okay. It happens all the time.
So the this program is called a rolling top-up. Can I infer from that that the rolling part of this is that there is a periodic review, or is it, is it established based on 2025 actuals that, have been verified and approved by the region, and then established for 2026? And is there a further review at some point other than an annual review based on the actuals from the prior year?
So based on the current framework, and that's kind of why I emphasize that at the end there, Victor, the ministry's framework does allow, or for an annual review of that rolling top-up ratio. So to your point, and we haven't, we're kind of doing things one step at a time. So we haven't turned our attention to what the future rolling top-up ratio adjustments will be, right? But based on ministry direction, there could very well be changes. Like if there were significant underspending, that could result in a reduction or a change to your ratio, which will mean, like for 2027, which will mean a further reduction to your allocation. So that is part of the framework, but we're not quite there yet. So, we're going to take things kind of one step at a time, but that is what the intent is with the name, and that's what the intent is with the framework. Yes.
So when you say rolling, like this is basically a once a year review.
It could
Not
be a
like
once a year adjustment. Yes. It could be.
But
And I say
not
could.
more likely than once a year.
No, not now. The only thing that I will preface that with is so rolling top up. So at this time, we haven't made any decisions about 2027. So we want to see, how this year goes, and then we'll decide about next year, and we'll have to really look at the provincial direction about whether, what the direction will be in relation to reassessing the ratios on a go forward basis. So once we have that, we'll make decisions about it. But in going forward, we would so you're going to have, it's going to be similar to this year. We anticipate some benchmark changes, annually. We'll anticipate, there will be a review of based on reconciliation of each agency's spending. And then the other thing that's critical for LHCC agencies, as you know, that and thank you all for your data. Thank you for your update task data. Because we use that data to update your allocation. So if your active home changes, that you will see adjustments to your allocations based on your service level changes. So so then in that way, Victor, we might see more than one adjustment, because we're still going to continue to monitor service level changes throughout the year via the update tasks. So if your homes go up or down, right? And also we're also collecting on the same vein at the same time, your projected revenue offset, right? So those are some of the key drivers or things that could change that might have an impact on your allocation. But we're trying to streamline that as much as we can. And every year we're going to try to get better and better in terms of our getting into a good cycle. But we've made significant strides, and I do want to thank all of you on the call who continue to provide the data that we ask for on a quarterly basis. We do use it. We do look at it. It informs your allocation. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Victor.
Thank you.
I'll just check the chat again. Doesn't look like there's anything there. So just give it a little bit.
Maybe while we're waiting, Alicia, do you mind? Can we just go to slide 11? Oh, actually, you know what? Go to slide 12, actually, because it's the same message on both. So I just want to, so each agency can kind of figure out, or you can forecast what might happen to you. So again, I just want to highlight what we expect to happen, like this segment of the slide in the middle here. So again, if you spent most of your allocation in 2025, if that's what you reported, when we implement the rolling top up, it will most likely be an increase, like a cost of living type increase to your expenses. That's what you would be expecting. However, if you did not, if you have underspending and for 2025, you will see a decrease when we implement your rolling top up. So all those details, agency specific details, like Adrian said, that's going to be communicated to you in mid-July. So you'll know exactly where you fall. But like between now and then, you can kind of guess, right? Based on what you've already submitted. And then start to plan, right? To make those adjustments. So that's just one thing that I do want to highlight. And that is the same for any center, LHCC, in any of these pathways. It's really the same result because it's just based on how the rolling top up essentially is calculated, like Adrian took us through at the beginning. So
And I don't see any questions in the chat, sorry, or any hands, but once your memos are received, and you receive your memos, your EYS will be reaching out to you and working kind of individually with you just on this. I know typically they do teleconferences after a teleconference, but because it is kind of customized, as Olivia was saying, based on your spending and your allocation. So EYS will be working directly with you on that, and then ultimately supporting you with your plan and planning till the end of the year. So you can look out for that once your memos are distributed. But again, if you have any questions, your EYS is available, or you can always email us at our earlier system division email, and we're happy to answer any of your questions.
wonderful.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Enjoy the World Cup for those of you who are watching. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.